everybody. Welcome back to the Enchanted Inkwell. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michael.
I'm Britt.
And I'm Blake.
Cool. And I think as we're ramping up to DLC Vegas and Birmingham in the next couple weeks, we wanted to take this opportunity to talk about Lorcana metagame and how it's shaping up. So I think I wanted to really kind of talk about something that we've been hearing a lot, and we've kind of been talking internally a little bit about it, which is that a lot of people in the community seem to be saying that rock, paper, scissors. The meta is rock, paper, scissors. The meta is always rock, paper, scissors, and they don't find that fun or they don't find that enjoyable. They want to be able to play what their pet decks or whatever, and they're like, oh, it's a shame that there's always these 3 decks, 4 decks that dominate. And so it's like a really interesting concept that I think that that's worth bringing up and maybe mentioning. I find that every TCG that I've played always inevitably ends up in a situation where there's 3 or 4 main decks and everybody else is just vying to be one of those 3 or 4 main decks. Blake, you kind of have experience in this area too. Like, how do you feel about that? Or what are your thoughts on something being rock, paper, scissors in a game like this?
Yeah, so my history with TCGs is that it is always going to be rock, paper, scissors. And I think a lot of that just comes down to standard fundamentals of understanding the games, right? Every TCG, you will have the archetypes, right? And the main archetypes being control, mid-range, and aggro. Some games have what you could say combo as well, but that just in a way is just a different version of aggro.
Okay.
At the end of the day. And so you ultimately have those aspects. And then from there, the specific decks, depending on what game you're playing, really just kind of fit into those zones. And so the rock, paper, scissor, as everybody likes to call it, is really just control, mid-range, and aggro. Control will beat your mid-range will beat your control, or your aggro, and your aggros will, generally speaking, beat the control decks. So that's your rock, paper, scissor, and then it's just a matter of like how things kind of float and fill in within those specific archetypes.
Right. So ultimately, you're saying that it's not necessarily like these 3 decks are rock, paper, scissors, but the archetypes that are rock, paper, scissors, and these 3 decks happen to fit into those archetypes. And realistically, I think that if you kind of extrapolate that, the decks that are fringe or that aren't played or that we don't see a lot of representation of should fit in one of those like pillars or one of those definitions of aggro, mid-range, or control. And then in a sense, it's just kind of like, is your aggro deck or your brew aggro deck better than the big aggro deck?
The most meta version of the most optimized combination of cards that have been determined.
Right.
Through testing.
Is your brew better than the one that's considered paper at the moment, right? Or is your brew better than the one that's considered rock, right?
You had a really good, you were talking about the deck archetypes as rock, paper, and scissor.
Correct.
Yeah. What could you go over that again?
Okay, yeah. So the way that I always like to view it is that with rock, paper, and scissor, I always take control as the rock, right? Control is a very specific type deck where it looks to control everything. So it just kind of, it has the answers to everything. Its plan is to control the other decks based off of what they're doing. So I always put that in the rock spot. Aggro decks tend to beat the control decks, and they end up also being sort of, I'm going to say, second in line for how things develop, which then becomes paper. It's also an interesting analogy because aggro decks tend to be the most flimsy in the sense of like they have one line that they're trying to go with, and if they get sort of disrupted from that line, they can get ripped pretty easy.
Glass cannon, I think I've seen in wargaming.
Yes.
The armies that I liked to play when I was back in my wargaming days.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's give me something that's gonna thread that needle And if it doesn't, then it's pretty fragile.
Right. Then you have mid-range, which I consider scissors. So mid-range tends to be, it mixes the elements of control, right? The heavy hitting aspects of control with some of the lower to the ground elements of the game, which would be aggro. So it allows them to get past the early game of aggro, but then also have like the higher end game, which then ends up, so I like to put them as scissors, right? Because they're the ones that will end up doing it. And so that is ultimately your rock, paper, and scissors as it like lines up with aggro control and mid-range. And then to kind of go back to what Michael was talking about, where the archetypes fit into that, right? Right now we have 3 very solid, like top of the line archetypes in Steelsong, Ruby Sapphire, and Ruby Amethyst, right? These are kind of like the pillars of the format right now. And interestingly enough, one of the reasons why we don't really see aggro, even though there are lots of people trying to build aggro right now, one of the reasons why aggro doesn't really seem to be winning very well is because 2 of those big 3 decks are, I would put them more as mid-range. I think Steelsong plays more as mid-range with its like low to the ground removal, and then also kind of like the aggro package now. And then Ruby Amethyst has always been the mid-range. Like it is the typical like mid-range of like, I'm going to play these very efficient, effective, low to the ground characters, but then I've got a huge top end that like board wipes and does everything you want it to.
Yeah.
Whereas the Ruby Sapphire deck at this point in time is the control deck. And I'm not sure where it really fits as far as everything, but it is definitely the control deck. There are 2 versions of it. They're the items version, and then of course, like we'll just call it the Sisu version, which is the more controlling version at that aspect. And that's kind of where the metagame is currently. And we'll see where it goes from there.
Right. I feel like a few episodes ago, I'll say we, but mostly me, was saying that Daisy Duck was going to make a splash in the aggro scene. And I think it did for a little bit, but I guess, you know, not to harp on it too long because we don't see it, but what do you think is the reason we're not seeing good aggro decks? Like, is there like a fundamental flaw that currently exists that, you know, they just can't turn the corner? Because like usually, like if we look at like a successful metagame in other TCGs, all 3 should be able to kind of thrive, right? Each one of them keeping checks and balances on the other. But why is it that the aggro is just like not prevalent enough? Is it because there's not enough control players that aggro can succeed, or like what do you think?
I think that the removal is just too good, right? Like you have like very fast removal in Steel, and then you have total removal in Ruby. And I don't think that like there's go wide aggro decks, but show me a go wide aggro deck that survives a grab your swords, and it doesn't take much to get something on the board that'll sing grab your swords, and then you can also play something else with your ink. What do you think?
Right. I would tend to agree. I go back a little bit more to the fact that I believe 2 of the 3 decks are mid-range, and they're just always going to overpower ultimately the aggro decks, right, which are just small and low to the ground. So I don't think it just doesn't have, they don't have the components right now to really get over the hump against a lot of. And the thing is, with even within like other games, right, aggro is always, it is the glass cannon. It really is, where it takes one mistake and you're out of the game, right? You forgot to turn that thing sideways at the right time, and now all of a sudden you've lost all your tempo and you're out of it. And I think that's part of it. And a lot of the decks, because even decks that aren't necessarily in that top 3, right, you have Amber, Emerald, Under the Sea decks, right, also designed to just ultimately like get rid of the aggro deck. So I think in the design space, everybody's trying to beat these 3 decks, and in doing so, they're building them in a way that also just kind of pushes aggro out. And aggro doesn't quite have all the right pieces. So you were talking about Daisy Duck. I know that the Amethyst Chronomicon has like
Necronomicon.
Yeah, so that item
Comic-Con, San
has
Diego.
definitely been like added to sort of the hyper aggro version of that. And I think that's a wonderful addition because at the end of the day, right, you're looking for more resources for yourself to just be able to continue throwing things on the board and hope you get enough to stick to the wall fast enough. Or it gives you that opportunity to also potentially rebuild after like a big, under the sea or grab your sword that you can mitigate it.
We saw a pretty good performance out of an aggro deck for one of the DLCs, but I think it was one of the earlier DLCs.
Yeah, Frank Karsten, right? The first one.
No, he was playing Steelsong.
Oh, okay. No, it was then the second one, Atlanta, because
Yeah.
one of them happened on like the day before or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So it was whoever won Atlanta. I don't.
It was Amber Amethyst.
Yeah,
Amber
it was.
Amethyst.
It was. It spiked Perdita for a hot minute.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too because what I'm thinking of when I'm hearing this is we have a friend who is a day one Steelsong player who has only ever brought hyper aggro, like good hyper aggro. I love his hyper aggro deck. It looks so fun. I don't pilot Amber the way that he pilots Amber. He's just so good at it. And inevitably he gets in there and he lands at 9th, or something like that. So he's so talented and the deck build is good. But when it comes to top 8ing, it's just like right on the bubble.
Yeah. And I think that has less to do with him talent wise and more to do with just all of the components aren't quite there.
Right. The way that we didn't see all of the components there for like Rafiki was weird when Rafiki dropped because it was like, there's one hyena. What are you talking about? He doesn't take damage from hyenas or, hyenas, here we are two sets later, hyenas are a thing. So much a thing that they were like a starter deck archetype. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what aggro gets. But the thing is, like, you can just piece it out and you can slot it into like a really good mid-range deck. So like how do you create more aggro in purple or in red when you know that that's just going to get slotted into a Ruby Amethyst deck?
You don't.
I mean, that happened, I would argue, with Flynn.
But
no,
I think
Flynn requires a big body to proc it.
But I think this goes back to kind of what Michael was talking about, where the frustrations are. You have a lot of people that are trying to innovate new decks, right?
Sure, yeah.
New archetypes that fit within their rock, paper, or scissor. And I think a lot of people really spend their time innovating in the aggro space. Because again, at the end of the day, right, you're trying to exert your characters to get lore. It makes sense. Oh, if I could just tap, get 20, then they can't stop me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because to a degree, you almost can't stop them if they just keep playing characters and tapping, exerting them.
Mm-hmm.
Then ultimately, like you can't. There's not much you can do, which is why you end up having. Oh shoot, I don't remember the spell. It's 2 uninkable amethyst, gain 2 lore.
Gathering wisdom.
Gathering
and
wisdom.
knowledge.
Yes. So I think that's why that card, everybody was like super excited about it, right? Especially even in Ruby Amethyst, because a lot of times you get to that 18 lore and you're like, okay, draw a goat. Draw a goat. Here I go. I just need to draw a goat. And so it gave them more options. And I think it also slots into that aggro aspect of things. But is it enough right now? I don't know. Could it be enough in Las Vegas? Is there something that people haven't quite found yet or put together? Right? We were talking about Steelsong, or not Steelsong, but Blue Steel going into Dallas for you when we were testing for you. And one of the reasons why I ended up working with you ultimately is because I thought that Blue Steel was a really strong deck at the time, but that nobody had figured out the right 60. And that's what I was saying. It's like, I think it's the best deck, but nobody's figured out the right 60. It's a lot of it comes down to that, right? And I think you look at this current metagame in those big 3, I'm not sure. So like historically, Ruby Sapphire just absolutely dominates Steelsong, like pretty bad. But I'm not sure that is the case as it stands currently. But I think part of that is waiting for the meta to adapt. It's the same reason why like Ruby and Amethyst always seems to lag behind a little bit. And then by the end of the season, it's always, 25% of the field is because these are the decks that need the other decks to kind of figure out what they're doing. And since there's no consensus 60 card list currently for Steelsong, the other decks are waiting to see, okay, well, what is it that I need to be able to put into my deck to consistently beat those decks?
Well, even the last time, so we can maybe talk about core differences between like England Steelsong versus Sky's Steelsong. But even back in England, you had a split field where there was Lantern Steelsong, there was Prideland Steelsong, and there was Flute Steelsong. And you see that, if I'm not mistaken, with they're sort of competing for the rest of the 60 right now. Which of the three is going to bear out? Item removal, location removal, or more item removal?
Right, sure. I mean, I think I think coming back to your point real quick, Blake, is that if Ruby Sapphire is the control deck, it needs to know what it's controlling against to thrive,
Sure,
right? And
yeah.
so if the other lists are still in flux, it's hard to know what you're trying to control against. But I also think that that's part of the benefit of the other decks right now is that to kind of play around Ruby Sapphire or to kind of like navigate that, they are in this like, well, who knows what these last 8 cards are going to be like, and that's going to help their share. And I think that right now, if we look a little bit back on set 4, the first big DLC, first big event, it was like Emerald Steel everywhere. Amber Steel seems to be kind of dominating, or what a lot of people kind of consider the dominant deck right now, right? And I think that, it got one obvious tool, which was Prince Naveen. I think that card in itself is pretty groundbreaking in the sense that it seems like an easy 4 of in all the lists that Amber Steel's that Steelsong has kind of settled on, right?
Well, and I hate to interrupt you there too, but like the general consensus still, I know that like the winner of CCS had 4 of, and he very specifically came out and said, if you're not playing 4, you're wrong.
Right.
But the community as a whole is not 100% with him on that.
Okay. Yeah. I wasn't aware of that, but like, I feel like that at least the people that we've been playing with, they've seemed to agree that Prince Naveen is a 4 of. It is one of the strongest tools that Steelsong got, along with Pete, game referee, right? Game referee.
Yes, P is by far the best card that Steel got this set. P is like your Ursula Deceiver, right? It's going to be in the format until it's removed from the format, right? It's just such a huge thing where it gets you to that critical turn where you're just about to like get over the hump, or at least get so close to winning that like anything after this effort will get you there. And it stops your opponent from basically being able to answer you in that wide spectrum that they want to be able to, right? Stopping the be prepared when you've gone wide so that you can quest out just absolutely destroys a strategy.
Right. So I guess moving into or going into Vegas or Birmingham, how do you feel the Steelsong list is going to kind of shape up in those last slots? Do you think Lantern is there to stay? Do you think Naveen is a 4 of? Do you think Daisy Duck has a place in the deck? Or, are we going to see old tech like Flutes or Pride Lands or Harps come back?
Literally was just getting ready to make an 8 of Harps joke. We called Harps the worst card in the set for months.
Still is.
For months. And then people were like, well, actually. And I'm like, I think you just did it to spite me. I think, yeah.
I'll still hate on Harps. I mean, I definitely think Harps don't have a place because of Pete, aforementioned Pete. Like, if you try to play Harp and then I play Pete, now I blink your song and your Harp is gone. Like, that's a real feel bad situation. I think that I don't think that that's going to be the tech. I don't think that's going to be the secret sauce. But maybe somebody smarter than me has a different opinion.
Took her from a bad card to a worse card with Pete.
Right. So I think back to the question, which was, what do we think the difference is going to be within the certain specific archetype of Steelsong? Mm-hmm. And I think going into Vegas and Birmingham, you're going to see all of them. Yeah. I don't think because of a lack of information, right? There's no online platform and there are just a few tournaments here and there going into these large events. Everybody is clamoring for all the information, which is why, the winner of CCS having a pretty starkly different build than what the general consensus was of, like, Daisy's definitely in the deck. Naveen's are a 2 or 3 of. Mm-hmm. He also had 3 Cinderellas in, which most people were on 1 or 2, right, of the big Cindy's. So I think going into it, he made very good metagame choices for that tournament.
Okay.
I think there are going to be a wave of people that look at it and say, yeah, okay, that's great. Not adapt to what they think is going to be coming in Vegas. You're going to have other people that are going to adapt, which is why I think you're going to see every variation of this except for Harp, right? Like Pete blanks Harp so bad that if Harp wasn't the worst card in the set, it is now. So, but I think you're just going to see, right? You're looking at 2,000 plus competitors,
right?
Steelsong conservatively is going to be 20% of the field. 50,
okay.
20% of the field.
That's the odds you're going to give it. The
Vegas odds. Conservative. I think it's going to be higher. I think it's going to be quite a bit higher. Just because, again, lack of information, right?
Well, actually, not to talk over you, my hot take, which we've talked about a little bit, is I think it's going to be higher because I think all of the green steel players are going to pivot into Steelsong.
Right. So expand upon that thought. Because I don't think we've told the viewers.
Yeah. No, 100%. So when green steel was in Floodborn, I considered it a discard deck, right? Like, as far as an archetype goes, I considered it like sort of like melee, discardy, that kind of thing. The way that I saw people locally playing green steel was not a hard discard or a hard mill deck. It was a Steelsong deck with Emerald. Like, the Diablo draw was great. The Bucky stuff was incidental. It wasn't incidental in the sense that it ruined my life for 3 months. It was, and it is, I can't call it incidental. They obviously errated it for a reason, right? It was a real bad, feels bad icing on the cake. But even without Bucky, you can play green steel very similar, I think, to a Steelsong deck. You have draw and Emerald now that looks very similar to, like, draw in Amber. You have all of the same steel removal. And when you're talking about some of the bonus that happens in Steelsong, you're talking about singers, right? So singers do 2 things generally. They discount the cost of what you're paying to sing because singers are generally higher than their ink cost. And you are using them to do an action and then also having a full resource pool to draw from after that. So you're doubling or maximizing your resources in that regard. You see in those really, really good Emerald Steel decks, you saw people shifting. This was something that one of our set champ friends were talking about when I was like, man, Robin Hood questing, that sucks. And he was like, if I'm questing with Robin Hood, something has gone terribly wrong for me. He was like, he was like, Britt, the last thing I want to be doing is questing with stupid Robin Hood. If I'm questing with Robin Hood, I would rather it be a beast. I would rather it be drawing me a card and questing. He was like, the whole reason this card is like running all over you right now is because I'm using it to sing stuff that is then going to allow me to do other things, that kind of thing. So I think that the Ursula's Return players who played green steel very well are going to jump over onto Steelsong because it does all of the same things, much in the same way that you're going to see a lot of crossplay between Emerald Amethyst and Ruby Amethyst. There are, you know, you're not going to see a Ruby Amethyst player necessarily jumping over to Steelsong the same way, I don't think. So I think that you're going to, if you look at like market share, if you look at what, because there were people who stuck on Steelsong the entire time, played it through Ursula's. Those people are going to be playing at the DLCs, and then the green steel players are going to be playing Steelsong.
So I agree with you both that I think that Steelsong is going to be really, really prevalent at these two DLCs. I'm going to disagree that I don't necessarily think it's going to be a jump from the Emerald Steel players, but I think that it's just because it got the most obvious power spike.
Sure. Oh yeah,
right?
I can absolutely see. Yeah, you look at it when you were doing like Lorcana forecasting. You were like, "Oh, Naveen is going to be the problem." He was the most clear cut impact. On
a lot of people were like, "Oh, Naveen seems way too good," right? And it just, you know, you got Naveen and Pete, and you know, maybe some other stuff in like people that are trying out Daisy Duck or, I mean, maybe that's just it. But I think that it got the most obvious upgrades.
Yes.
And so I think that a lot of the people who have played with it or dabbled with it or had even considered at one point, and then having it won a large 10K tournament, being like one of our only sources of information for how this meta quote unquote looks, right? I think that that's going to be a reason a lot of people flock to it. Like, oh, it's the most obvious strong deck, so why not? I do think, I mean, it's a good segue into another one of the more powerful decks, which is Ruby Amethyst. You briefly mentioned that you think that Ruby Amethyst players are going to won't hop over to Steelsong because like the play style is different, right? But I don't think that's necessarily the case. My thought is that Ruby Amethyst is still placed well at CCS.
Sure did, yeah.
So I think that those Ruby Amethyst players are still excited to solve the format, or you know, they kind of know Steelsong is going to be one of the boogeymen. So now they kind of know how to tweak for that, and so I think that Ruby Amethyst players are just going to stick with that. So I don't think that population is jumping ship necessarily because it's or not jumping to Steelsong because of that, but they're not jumping to Steelsong because their deck is still good.
Oh, right? Sure. Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, the comparison I was making was the dissimilarity between the two decks, but I think that you bring up a really good point, which is that Kendall Burdett was at CCS and is a Ruby Amethyst staple, mainstay, god in his own right kind of thing. And I think that he has a lot of credibility, right? And so when you're looking at when you're a Ruby Amethyst player and you're like, what am I'm trying to make sense of this when the meta has not settled, you're going to look to players like him and to the rest of the field at CCS if you're like me, and you know, those are resources that you lean on. And if we wanted to talk about it specifically, you know, he played a deck list that was pretty. It just kind of shows we know what the obvious upgrades were.
Let's talk about obvious upgrades, because off the top of my head, I feel like you slot in like library has maybe a place, but does it have a place? Can you afford to play more than just the Four Queens Castle? And then I'm racking my brain, like I can't really think of other actual set 5 cards that feel good in that archetype.
And therein is my beef with the state of the Ruby Amethyst union right now. I'm looking to Kendall being like, hey homie, like how do I play this deck? Because by all accounts, not a lot of new stuff I'm super stoked on. And then I pull his deck list up and I'm like, 2 libraries. Cool. He does run Sisu, so that was an interesting thing to watch from a month or two ago. I remember, and this is, I don't know anything. This isn't like I thought of it first. I remember cracking Big Sisu and being like, oh, dope. There's a Ruby Amethyst card. And everybody was like, absolutely not. It is too slow. Here are all the reasons why it doesn't belong to you. And then plucked it out of my hands and gave it to Sapphire Ruby. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I was super. And now all of the Ruby Amethyst decks run Big Sisu, which is good because, I don't know. Okay, so, womp womp. Not to be a big womp womp. I'm going to be a little womp womp. I don't like Ruby Amethyst right now.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. But
sure.
So you mentioned Big Sisu, right? So
Yeah.
so that's a change. And I think that we saw that towards the end of maybe Fort Worth. There was somebody that played
The winner.
Yeah.
Was that it?
The winner
Right? Yeah.
had Big Sisu in his deck.
Had Big Sisu. And,
Right.
And sorry, go ahead, Blake.
Yeah, to kind of go over what Britt was talking about with the list specifically. I looked at that list as well. I would say it is very stock, very season 4 stock, except that it had 2 libraries. Because I would consider Sisu as being stock at this point in time.
Yeah.
The question with Sisu is how many, right? That's where the real variance is. And I think if you have 1 or 2 in your Ruby Amethyst deck, that's stock. That's just the easy it's going to be. Where I started looking at the comparisons, because we had a handful of decks that we wanted to go over, that you wanted to go over,
Sure.
and looking at this is that there's definitely 2 very different camps when you're looking at the 1 slot.
Yes.
You have the 1/3s, right? Mini and Olaf versus this list, which had the Chernobog followers and the brooms.
And Cogsworth and one of the other ones too.
Cogsworth is a new, like, I don't consider him a 1-drop. He costs 1, but you're never really playing him on turn 1.
So valid. Yeah.
So when it comes down to what you're actually playing on turn 1, the shift to the 1/3s is because of the Steelsong, right? That's the
100%.
adaptation, because you don't want Let the Storm Rage on, just picking something off, when you're on the draw. So a lot of players have gone to the 1/3s, which very valid. I think what I like about No I'm Not's list is that with the library and sticking to the level 1s or the 1-drops that he stuck with, is that you get that like auto library almost out of it. So you move your broom to the library, you quest with it, you play something, and you're okay, I'm going to draw 2 cards now.
Oh yeah.
Right. So being able to like use the library really is just like an additional card draw, but how it pairs extremely well with those 1-drops is fantastic. But again, with that list, when you look at like a shifting meta new set, it's 2 cards from set 5, right? And we can go over to kind of go over what Michael was talking about. Other cards than library, the 5-drop Elsa.
I was just gonna say
playable.
Elsa.
Okay. Yeah, I actually saw that when we were playing Constructed this past week.
Right.
You're talking about the one that rushes, exerts something when it comes into play.
Yeah.
And has evasive.
Yeah.
Kendall was the only one who didn't run Elsa. The other 3 did. So
Okay.
she's a good representative of an upgrade, even though she wasn't in the list that did the best of the Ruby Amethyst.
Sure.
There is not a lot of Elephant going around.
Elephant is still playable.
I like Elephant. Anything that gives me another bounce is great, I think. But then it's a question of how much Medusa, how much Tremaine do you play again? So there's some variety in that of how many Medusa, how many Tremaine. And then some folks are doing BKU, and some are saying no PKU, and then some are saying BKU and Teeth and Ambitions.
Teeth and Ambitions doesn't feel right to me. I don't think it hits enough. And I feel like, I mean, maybe Teeth and Ambitions was an overcorrection to everybody saying Daisy Duck's going to bring hyper aggro to the stratosphere, and then hey, they were ready for it, playing the 1/3s, being able to Teeth and Ambitions with them, stopping the Lilos or whatever else was coming down, the Arthurs, the Pinocchios, things like that. But like we kind of mentioned earlier, we're not really seeing hyper aggro post. So, is that because Teeth and Ambitions was keeping them down, or is that just is that to me it doesn't feel super necessary. And then I want to bounce back to Blake the comment that you made about the brooms and the 1-drops getting extra value on the library. If we're thinking that Steelsong is going to be a lion's share of the metagame, is that the right choice? Because yes, you're getting extra cards off that, but then you just get them whole new worlded away, right? Like Steelsong's gonna just come down and be like, whoops, gone. Like all those extra cards you drew, sweet, gone.
Yeah, you absolutely could, but also at the same time, you play that matchup differently, right?
Well, I don't. I'm not
Right.
smart enough to do that.
It's being able to like look at your tools, the tools that you have, and saying, look, these are not what I want to be playing on that. So one of the things that I really want to go over, because we talk about Daisy Duck all the time, this is something that people really need to be made aware of, and it happened at last night was our locals constructed tournament, and I was watching at home. I don't remember. I think it was Ruby Amethyst playing against Steelsong.
Okay.
Steelsong player quests with their Daisy Duck.
Yep.
This is, I think, turn 4 or turn 5. So they either had like the ink to play a Naveen or ink to play a whole new world, or they even had, and I think they had a Robin Hood out, like a shifted Robin Hood out already. Okay. They quest with Daisy Duck. Off the top of the deck for the Ruby Amethyst player is Maui. What do?
You let them draw the Maui and then you whole new world.
Absolutely. What do you think the Ruby Amethyst player did?
Drew the Maui?
He drew the Maui, knowing that there's an unexerted Robin Hood on his opponent's field. It's exactly what you wanted him to do, right?
Well, that's not a May, right? They have to draw it.
It's a May.
Daisy Duck is a May.
It's a May.
It's a May. So when you reveal the character, you may put it into your hand. You are not required. The only thing that is not a May is that if it is not a character, it has to go to the bottom of the library.
I've got such beef with this offensive use of a whole new world.
Wait, no. Well,
really
I mean,
grinds my gears.
That's crazy. Read the card, everybody. Read the card. I always thought it was a force trigger that if it is a character, you just have to put it in your hand.
Right, because
so,
you're just.
But did you miss the
Goblin
trigger
Guide
by not telling anything?
Oh no!
Just kidding. What were we saying?
So, I just wanted to bring that up. That when you're playing against the Daisy Duck, regardless of what archetype you're playing against, it is a made trigger if it is a character on top. Which means if you are playing against a Steelsong deck, you are not required to take that card.
So the good advice is, only take the card if that is the last thing they can do on their turn.
Always take cards. More cards are better than no cards.
No, because you're going to wheel them out of my hand.
More cards. Always more cards.
Mike, you menace.
Not enough cards.
Well, and I think
menace.
The sad part about this, right, is that Wheel comes down, and if he had chosen not to pick up that, he's got a Maui to just start wrecking the other guys.
True.
Right.
And I have gone on the record to say, wheel me. I draw cards anyway. Please don't wheel me.
Did the reverse psychology aspect actually work?
I'm baby. Please don't wheel me.
All right. So, I mean, we've gone over the two that we think, well, okay, I guess we didn't make predictions. Steelsong 25 plus, Blake. What do you think the percentage of red purple will be? Ruby Amethyst.
I think it will be slightly less than 15%. And again, I'm being conservative, right? Okay. We could easily say that Steelsong's 30-35% on its own.
Okay.
I don't know if there's been any large tournaments where any deck has been over 30%.
Okay.
So I think 30% is the cap. So you could say 20 to 30%. So I think 20 is the conservative for Steelsong.
Okay.
I think Ruby Amethyst is in that 15 to 25%. It really depends on the innovation, right? If they can find a way, because it's always had a decent 50-50 matchup against Steelsong. I don't know any hardcore Ruby Amethyst player in our circle that has ever been afraid to play into Steelsong.
Sure.
It's not
Me?
a fun matchup.
Yeah, but you're afraid of your baby. You're afraid of him.
I was about to get so mad at him. And I was like, oh, yeah, baby. That's true. No, I mean, no, okay. Thinking of it from the perspective of having gone through that green steel cycle, I was like, couldn't be worse than the last time, right? Like,
Famous last words.
couldn't be worse than the hobby breaking set that we had for Ruby Amethyst. I think, I am not the TCG wizard that I regard you to be. I think that, but in my opinion, there were enough folks who did well in top 16 for CCS that I think that, and there are not a lot of changes to these decks, right? So a very good Ruby Amethyst player, wonder what that looks like, couldn't be me.
Yeah.
Could
Really
be you.
good Kendall, my chip on Twitter DMs. We got to get some coaching in. So a really good Ruby Amethyst player who has had not a lot of edits to their deck.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely think that they're taking Ruby Amethyst to set champs.
So 15 to 20% of the meta share, higher or lower?
Oh man, are we putting money on it?
Always.
No.
I mean, it is Vegas.
Let it roll, baby.
The Michael Mouse tax is
actually,
coming.
no. I think that I am legally prohibited from wagering on Lorcana at this moment right now.
I think generally everybody is legally prohibited from
I
wagering
think I
on
have a very
Lorcana.
specific reason why I can't wager on Lorcana right
yeah?
now. Yeah.
So there are packs on the line, not cash.
No, there's a no, I think that in my inexpert opinion, I think that you'll see a distribution that is fairly similar to what you saw in the top 16 for CCS, which was what, like 5 decks?
Yeah, so like, I mean, that's like,
30-ish?
20, 30-ish%.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're thinking a little bit higher. Probably like, sorry, you thinking that Steelsong and Ruby Amethyst are about the same?
I don't know. I think that the more what were the two? Ruby Amethyst and Steelsong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Steelsong's going to edge out. I think I'm with Blake a little bit on this. I think Steelsong's going to edge out, but I also think that Steelsong's going to have more. Like I'm guessing Steelsong's like 33-ish, like 35-ish, and then like maybe 25 on Ruby Amethyst.
I was going to say, I was like, I'll bump down to 25%. And not just because I'm
Price is
tagging
right.
on with yours. I'm like 26%, actually.
The Price is Right move.
Yeah, no, you're right, because by the time I was doing some math in my head, you're gonna have the meta breakers, you're gonna have the stuff like that going on.
Yeah, and then so then that kind of brings us to the last of the big three, which is Ruby Sapphire. So this one, Blake, I didn't really play in set 3, but you mentioned that in set 3, Ruby Sapphire was pretty strong force. And then going into set 4, Ruby Sapphire was going to be an even bigger force. But then that was the reason kind of Steelsong got chased out, right? With Steelsong being back, Ruby Sapphire still had a pretty strong showing at CCS. What do you think about the deck's position right now? What are some cool tools that you think that it gained that, the meta is not ready for yet?
So, yeah, going into set 4. So at the end of set 3, Ruby Sapphire had definitely established itself as a very solid deck, right? And ramp and removal, it's kind of everything you want. You got to get to that end game quickly, and then you also had Tamatoa and Dime, so you could finish quickly as well and uninterrupted to an extent. So it had established itself going into set 4 that it was a really great deck, or at least a very solid archetype.
I played it in Floodborne and had a really good time. It was bit of a game changer when like the diamond ammo hit.
Right. Set 3 added so much, right?
Yeah.
How Far I'll Go also got added. Grammatala got added, right? It got a lot from set 3. So it definitely threw it into that tier 1 sphere. And then set 4 came out and you ended up getting Big Sisu, which again got ripped out of Ruby Amethyst's hands and into because they can ramp to it faster.
That's true.
And then, of course, it also gave them something to get on the board and another dime target to a degree.
Can I interrupt? The other reason I figured out over time was just in the ink kind of scope of things. Nobody needs a dragon to hit on 8 after they have be prepared it on 7. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's why it's not in Ruby Amethyst. But still, it was a bummer because it's a pretty card and I wanted it. Anyway, please continue.
Right, yeah, generally speaking, you can just Tremaine whatever they play on turn 8.
In fact, that's what I try to do.
So Ruby Sapphire gained a lot from set 4 as well in the fact that it now gave you a removal spell, like a wide removal spell that couldn't be Ursula'd away, right? And so I think that with the fact that it also quested for 3, becoming a dime target, so going into set 4, the hype really was around Ruby Sapphire.
Right.
It was kind of the deck to beat, which I find to be interesting. We can talk about it a little bit more later. By the end of the set, it was not the deck to beat, right? The Bucky deck kind of did its thing. Whereas going into the set 5 meta, there are elements that everybody's working around in order to try. And I think this goes back to our Steel Sapphire discussion where I was saying it's the best deck. It just hasn't found the right 60. And I think given this meta, it probably is the best deck for the meta, especially considering how many people are going to be going to play Steelsong. I think it still has the edge on Steelsong.
Okay.
It just isn't as big of an edge as it was in set 3 or set 4. And so you're looking at it from the perspective of, can they find the right 60, or filthy to even say this, 62, 64. Okay, good. 60.
Who are you?
I thought
there was a 1% different. Never mind.
There's definitely a lot of discussion as to like where this deck sits, especially when you're looking at the uninkables versus inkables. And it got a lot of tools to play with, right? It got Chicha, which people are not really on right now. Tipo, which a lot of people are really, right? It's gives you a body. It's kind of one jump ahead, but it can't be ripped by bare necessities or right. Like,
yeah, I'm a little cold on Tipo. Like, just, again, I'm not the most experienced Ruby Sapphire player, but I did run it last night, and it always felt bad to be at like a card deficit after I did it. I enjoyed the ramp as previously mentioned. I do really like ramping. I enjoyed the ramp aspect of it, but it just felt so bad to like have to use a card from my hand. And I
figured it out.
What's that?
You can't play Whole New World in those colors.
You can't. I was really suffering from that. That was actually one of my big issues piloting the deck last night, which was, I was inking, I was ramping, and I was doing all the things, and then all of a sudden I was like, I don't have any cards in my hand, and I don't know what did I do wrong here. I heard that Ruby Sapphire was a ramp deck, and I just don't have cards to play with. And so back to Tipo, I like interesting card. I feel like I would still prefer the one jump, like run the risk of like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like if the opponent's trying to bare necessities me in Steelsong, if the opponent's trying to bare necessities me on turn 2 before I one jump, it feels a little, I'm like, okay, I guess, right?
That's a critical interruption to your strategy though.
I mean, again, not the most skilled Ruby Sapphire player. It just didn't feel like Tipo was right. Sure. Like being at the card deficit afterwards didn't feel very good, especially because I think a lot of the Steelsong players are pretty vocal about not casting a whole new world against Ruby Sapphire. So I'm not getting that instant, refill. So then you're like trying to work back up.
Yeah.
Felt a little bit tough. But sorry, I interrupted. You mentioned Chicha, you mentioned Tipo.
There's Visions of the Future,
Yep.
which is another card to just kind of set up and filter through your deck to be able to essentially see your entire. You get to search for the card you're looking for, the card you need right then,
You're talking
and
about
then
Merlin?
set it up.
No,
Visions of the Future.
It's two cast. It's develop your brain, but you get to look at 5 instead of 2 cards.
Oh, shows how much I play Sapphire. Sorry, but
Yeah,
wow.
that card
Oh yeah,
was
I see
really-
I see the art in my head now.
I was really hot on that card. I loved every time I casted that. I was like, oh, perfect. I get to look so deep into my deck to find what I need to get out of this current situation.
Yeah.
Right. Or even just set up where you're going.
Your deck,
And-
yeah.
Yeah. The other 2 cards, I'm going to lump these together because they effectively do the same thing in different forms. Cusco and I think it's Hideaway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, people are looking at that. And those 2 cards are actually extremely like sort of meta warping to a certain extent as far as is that going to push Steel Sapphire decks out? The ability to put someone's dime into their inkwell instead of just into their discard where they can Tamatoa it out. Completely different, completely
I say
changes
ha 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 again.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I also think it's interesting though. First of all, Britt, it's not in your colors, so I don't know why you're laughing so hard about
I
it.
can diversify or I can watch it happen.
But I think it's interesting because I feel like, and maybe I'm incorrect in this, but I feel like Ruby Sapphire struggled a little bit against Ruby Amethyst last set as well. But again, with Hideaway or Cusco, you've got an outlet to Queen's Castle, which was kind of one of the problematic cards, right? That it kind of struggled with. That was one of the falters.
I would say very specifically, Queen's Castle was the problem for Ruby Amethyst decks.
Right.
No.
And so being able to bury
baby.
that, right, with a 2 cost or a 6 cost with a body, like that feels like it might then potentially chase out Ruby Amethyst. I don't know. That's just all conjecture. But
We're tired.
no,
I'm
but I mean I
tired.
think that you're right. I think Ruby Sapphire got a lot of tools to play with. And, I don't know what the 60 looks like, but if its position previously was to push Steelsong out, it might have gotten the right tools to push it out again.
It's very possible.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. Again, I think with the upgrades that Steelsong received in set 5, it made it a far more impactful deck at this point. And so I'm not sure. Again, this is kind of where I was speculating. It's if Ruby Sapphire can claw back the percentages that it lost with the additions that Steelsong has, then maybe it does sort of depress the amount of Steelsong that we're going to see. But I think for right now, early on in this metagame, it's kind of Steelsong's world, right? It's Steelsong's a whole new world.
Yeah.
For and they've got so many different variations that we were talking about that they were playing, and there's the shift version, the non-shift version, lantern, flutes, right? There's just so many options that they have at this point in order to mix it up that you're going against the same deck, right? The same inks, but at the same time, like you don't know what version you're going against. So if one of them is playing the more aggro version versus like the not so aggro version, you may think, oh, this is going to be the aggro version and play it completely incorrectly.
Right. So, I mean, I think ultimately we talked about the big content creators or the big known names playing Steelsong, the known names playing Ruby Amethyst. So we're going to need Ruby Sapphire, superstar Din to show us the way, show us the sauce, right? He's been able to place well and do very well in all the DLCs that he's competed in. And I believe I saw on Twitter that he's heading to Birmingham. He has his 60 that he's keeping close to his heart. So let's see what he's got cooked up. Let's see if he can edge it out.
Another top 8.
Yeah, right.
Finish the Mickey playset.
Oh,
Let's see.
wow.
That would be lovely.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
But I wanted to circle back. You briefly mentioned that you're not kind of feeling too hot on Ruby Amethyst, whether it be because they didn't get a lot of cool tools or you're just not hot on it right now. So, I mean, I haven't really seen you at the weeklies. Our schedules haven't been lining up, unfortunately. But what are you on right now?
No, I have not played a single competitive game of Lorcana since the set rotated. So you're absolutely right. I don't, copious spare time going on right here, but that's actually really no excuse because when we were in set champ season last time around, we were playing Lorcana several nights a week. Like,
Yeah, but that time got kind of gobbled up by this.
oh, sure.
So
Yeah. To a degree, part of that, and part of that is you can only have so many jobs before you start topping out on the amount of time there is in a week. But what it really is was the post set champ crash. So try to stay positive, but I'm not super thrilled on another month-long set champ season coming up in October. I really wish it would have been like more truncated. It would have been closer to 2 weeks or something like that, like we've seen before. But I don't. Yeah, so I've been keeping an eye out to see like what is fresh, what is new, like what is coming up in Ruby Amethyst, because that is for sure my preferred deck, right? I just enjoy the way that Ruby cards play. I enjoy the way that Amethyst cards play. But before I went back to Ruby Amethyst in Inklands, I was playing Amethyst Emerald, and I think I've talked about it a little bit with you guys. When we talk about decks that didn't have enough stuff to get going, or that like needed more stuff to get going, what ended up happening was it was just a worse version of Ruby Amethyst, right? So Emerald had removal in the sense that it had bounce back to hand. So what you were doing is you were stalling, but you were banking on that to just be faster and more aggressive. So it was like a much more aggro version of Ruby Amethyst. Instead of paying the extra ink it costs to banish something outright, you just sort of like got it off the board and tried to run as fast as you could. It was a really fun deck. It just couldn't hold with other competitive decks, and which is why I hopped back over. We saw a cool Amethyst Emerald deck in the top 16 in CCS. When I was looking at it, it was really similar to, I had kind of mentioned it on an earlier recording, that there were two Amethyst Emerald decks that were sort of like making the rounds online, and that they were different. But the one that went to CCS was very similar to the Earlmeister list, which is what I have built out and that I'm playing.
That's the Clarabelle list?
It's Clarabelle. It is Clarabelle. It's got the shift Ursula from Deceiver into
The Sea Witch Queen?
The Sea Witch Queen, which is such a satisfying, cool set of cards. Like I wanted Big Ursula to be super impactful before, and like even tried teching her into Ruby Amethyst, and it wasn't like the move back then. But selfishly, she's really satisfying in this. So it's got, like New Mother Gothel, but then it's also got that like super solid Amethyst bounce package that I know and love, and a lot of us know and love. Cricky, who is so fun. Clarabelle, who is so fun. It runs Your Welcome. It runs the Emerald Karmakon. And then, it's kind of thin on the Queen's Castles, but it's got friends on it's so like if you're playing for funsies, and if you're like taking a break from competitive play, I really am enjoying the Emerald Amethyst. Regardless of strength, it's fun. But go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. You finished your thought.
Yeah. No, so regardless of strength, it's fun. It's fast. It's bouncy. It's tempo-y. But it absolutely makes sense that when you look at it in the CCS rankings, that it comes in under Ruby Amethyst, because even though it's more aggressive and even though it does some of the same things in giving yourself room to quest and bouncing things back to people's hands when they have on-play abilities, not the move. And I found myself really struggling going into Steelsong in particular when I was playing Amethyst Emerald. So that is like my pet list, like my pet interest right now. I would really like to see it do well in the DLCs. I can see where the limitations would be on it.
Yeah, that's fair. But I guess we know that you're not competing at DLC Vegas. If you were, would this be the deck that you take?
This would be the deck that I practiced with for 8 weeks, cried a week before the DLC, and then switched back to, if history was going to repeat itself. No, when it comes to the way that my brain works, when it comes to perfect practice, when it comes to, trying to make sure that I am mitigating some of the factors that could pull a match out of my hand.
Yeah.
Ruby Amethyst is just a solid deck in my opinion. It's just not fun right now. I think that if it had stuff in it that was more fun versus like useful, I could maybe get my like ADHD, the novelty could kick in, but it's just the same deck. And I'm like, sweet, dope. Worst castle. Nice.
So
not even Elsa could tempt me.
So you just like shiny, and there's nothing new in shiny that Set 5 provided you, and so you're throwing your old toys away, discarding them in the trash bin, ignoring them, and I get it. If it's not new, it's not for you.
I don't deserve it.
Cue the painting over Andy's name on the foot.
Ooh. No! Oh no! Now I have to go back and play it. The guilt.
No,
I
think it's a good point though. I think that burnout is something that, burnout is something that a lot of card game players suffer from, especially if they're grinding or practicing a lot for a certain event, or it just happens with any hobby really.
Yeah.
And it's good to go back and just kind of step back and just remember, at the end of the day, hopefully you're not doing this for a living, and it's a hobby. It's for fun, right? And so if you're not enjoying it, take a breather.
Yeah.
Play a different deck, calm yourself, reset, hit that reset button, right? Go back to some things. And that's kind of what I'm doing right now too.
Yeah. I was going to ask, what are you playing right now?
Well, for all of Set 4, I got a ticket to Dallas, and I really made it a personal goal to do well in Dallas. And so I went under the mantra of find a deck, stick with it, learn it inside and out, and do your best with it. And so after about a couple of weeks of monitoring, I ended up on Sapphire Steel, as we have talked about ad nauseum. But now I'm unable to make Vegas, and I'm unable to make Seattle. So I'm kind of in this like...
You were banned, weren't you? You can tell us. We won't tell anyone.
Due to ongoing legal matters, I am unable to speak about why I'm no.
Sure.
Just so because I'm not able to attend those events, there's not really any pressure that I'm putting on myself to do massively well, right? And so I'm taking this time to actually. I'm sorry,
I charged myself.
No,
Sucked it up the wrong hole.
Walk it back.
It's gonna happen though. That's the thing that's funny. This might even stay in.
This is staying in because I don't think I can find a good cut.
Don't you dare, editor Michael! Don't do me dirty.
It's in.
I'm dying.
And we're back.
I really want that to show up so much now.
No, so so I was talking about in Set 4, basically I played Blue Steel ad nauseum, and towards the end of the set I felt a little bit of burnout. I didn't really want to start off Set 5 like that. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to make Vegas or Seattle, so basically, long story short, I'm playing kind of everything right now. Every week, I am putting something together, taking it apart, putting something together, taking it apart. Last week I played, or last night I played Ruby Sapphire. 2 weeks ago, I played Steelsong. I think at one point I had the Lemon Lime Under the Sea put together. I'm thinking about putting Jafar together.
Jafar Wheel.
Yeah, yeah. I want it to work. I think it. I look.
It was my suggestion.
You're a menace.
I definitely was like, hey, you should play this, because we were talking about Amethyst Steel.
Yeah.
And he was talking about his concerns with the generally accepted list, and I was like, play this. Like, nobody will expect it.
Look,
nobody will.
You can take the blue steel out of the Michael, but you can't take the whole new world away. That's what.
That's literally what it came down to.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna put that on a T-shirt.
Yeah, because we were talking about Amethyst Steel and the fact that it did not have a whole new world, and I was like, well, you want to play Amethyst Steel? This one has a whole new world.
I've gotten cooked with Jafar Wheel.
I mean, I think it has the surprise factor. I don't think it has the legs to beat out the big decks in a large scale tournament. So I'm not advising anybody to bring it to Vegas or Birmingham. But if you do bring it to Vegas or Birmingham and top, then I would like my cut. I guess Blake gets part of the cut for suggesting it to me, and then I get a part of a cut. I don't know.
And you actually owe me some sort of apology fee for perpetuating the use and abuse of a whole new world on the greater.
Yeah, so basically,
community.
if you win with a whole new world, you owe the podcast a little bit of credit, I guess. I mean, whatever that may be.
Sure.
Sorry.
Great way to build a community.
Hey.
Just, you owe us.
I mean, that's how great communities are built. Like, they owe you things, so then they do favors, then somehow it gets imbalanced, then you owe them more, and then now you're doing favors back, then you're just trading favors back and forth, and community. Is that not how that works?
I didn't know how to really break into this, so I'm just going to say this. It's going to be me winning, and I'm not giving credit to the podcast. I'll just take it for myself since it was my idea.
Well, okay.
There you go.
Fair enough. We do have a running bet, a standing wager right now. So, if you day two, I will honor that, and it'll be fun. You'll see it post Vegas episode. When Blake wins the whole thing. And because of that, we can't tell you what Blake's playing. But I do want to throw it back to Blake one more time. You mentioned earlier that, the shifting of metas. And we were kind of theorizing or hypothesizing before we started recording. How do you feel like this meta, how long is it going to last? What's it going to look like at the end? Like, what are your grand predictions?
Okay, this meta will last until the next set comes out, right? Okay.
No.
Sure.
No,
Absolutely
the
not.
question you're asking is, how will the meta sort of rotate within this?
Yeah, right. Sorry.
Okay. Because I had made that comparison where going into set 4, Ruby Sapphire was literally the top dog. It was the one that everybody was super excited about, thought for sure was going to start winning every tournament, and then it just kind of didn't break that way. And right now we're seeing sort of the same parallel with Steelsong. Everybody's super excited about Steelsong. It gained very specific key cards that seem to improve its matchups against certain things. So the question really comes down to, is Steelsong going to be top dog beginning of the set through the meta to the end of the set?
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know. I think a lot of that is dependent on really Ruby Sapphire as to whether or not they can figure out how to really get over that. And they might not be able to, just because of the different variations of Steelsong that can be, right? There's the Daisy version versus not Daisy version, flutes versus, right? So many different variables in how you can build the Steelsong deck at this point in time. It really just comes down to, is anybody else going to be able to figure out that deck? And that's where everybody's working towards. I don't think anybody who's really paying attention to and trying to play competitively is negating the factor that everyone agrees that Steelsong is probably the deck to beat right now, even if it's for no other reason that it just won the biggest tournament of this current meta. And so it has a target on its back. Everybody else is going to be looking towards trying to beat that. I don't think that there is going to be some sort of dark horse deck like the Bucky deck that just comes in and destroys the meta and like warps everything. So it's going to be really interesting to see what comes of, whether that's some sort of aggro deck that kind of resets the format that can actually get over the hump, or some other control deck that comes in and says, okay, I can stop Steelsong and I'm going to be the top dog now.
Okay.
And I, at the risk of just sounding like an arrogant Ruby Amethyst player, I think that if very good Ruby Amethyst players figured out the Bucky issue last time, they're going to figure out the Steelsong this time. Steelsong has a lot of really great tools in the kit. Ruby Amethyst does too. And I think that, I would be really surprised if there was anything like, Toronto with no Ruby Amethyst in the top or whatever. It's not going to happen.
All right. Bold prediction time. Who do you have taking Vegas? Or what deck do you have taking Vegas?
Taking Vegas?
What deck do you have taking it? What deck do you want taking it?
I think it's going to be a Steelsong. I want it to be an Amethyst Emerald.
Okay. Blake?
That's a good question. I don't think it will be Steelsong.
Really?
But I don't know what it's going to be.
That's because Blake's not playing Steelsong, but he doesn't know what he's playing yet.
He's like, I can't disclose.
I think the wonderful part about saying stuff like that, right, is that within the realm of probability, and like maybe listeners should know, I've done zero testing. We are 2 weeks away.
No.
I'm just not there. I'm still dealing with my burnout phase.
It'll be forged in the fires of the airplane seatback tray. Goldfishing.
I did
really
talk about,
it'll be won or lost in the goldfishing.
I did talk about that, right?
You
that
did.
I was gonna use my time flying to practice on the little tray, and that I was going to be really good about where I'm placing everything so that I'll have 50% of my playmat to still use, because I will have put everything so close together because of the tray.
There's so much room for activities.
I know.
Blake will just be playing in this much. His opponent will be very confused, and that will be the strategic edge that you need.
Is that what it's going to be?
Yeah.
Did you mention what you want it to be?
I really don't know. I think that in a weird way, I think it's going to be a steel deck. Like it's going to have steel in it.
Oh, sure.
I just don't know what version that's going to be.
You
think an Amethyst steel?
I think if Din was showing up, it'd be him. Like, 100%.
So he's going to win Birmingham.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
Sure,
I think
Ruby
I think
Sapphire.
I think he's the winner over there. But if he gave his list to somebody over here and they can pilot it as well as he does, I think there's a chance.
Okay.
What
But
about you,
then
Mike?
that doesn't include steel. So I don't know.
I think I want a Ruby Sapphire items deck to win.
Ugh.
I actually think a blue steel deck's going to come out of left field and take this.
Really?
I've heard rumblings in the locals. I've heard rumblings online that blue steel feels pretty confident against Steelsong. And so that's my left field bold prediction. That's just
interesting.
It's not impossible. So I think
I don't think it is.
I think the hang up that it has currently is that I don't know if it can set up fast enough to stop Steelsong from gaining enough lore, especially the aggro versions. Yeah. So if you had a blue steel deck that avoided the aggro versions, it's possible, because Cogsworth essentially blanks the removal out of Steelsong.
Just do what I did in Dallas and dodge the bad matchups. That's it's 90, better lucky than good. That's what I always say. Better lucky than good.
Pro tip number 1.
It's funny that you say that. Could this be the like heroes built like a Steelsong, or like a Steelsong deck?
Maybe
You'd have to go like way less ramp. You'd have to be lower to the ground and faster.
like I'm happy to be right if Blue Steel wins without a whole new world, but I would be very sad if it wins.
If it won without a whole new world, I don't know if that makes it better or worse.
Worse, because a whole new world is awesome.
Ugh. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I mean, that's about all the time we have for this week.
Yeah.
So, it's been fun. It's been great talking about meta. Blake, I hope that you have gleaned some information from us to help guide you, viewers. I've hoped that you guys have gleaned some information that hopefully helps you out.
Tell us what you think is going to be doing well in Las Vegas and Birmingham.
Yeah, tell us how your testing has gone too, or what you've done to overcome burnout. If you've got any pointers or anything like that, that would be super cool. But yeah,
And then tell Blake what you promised to do when he wins the.
You don't have to do anything.
Vegas.
I was going to say, tell me what to play in Las Vegas.
Anything at this point, right?
Just put 60 cards together.
60 cards, 5 colors. Anyway, this was lovely. I enjoy hanging out with y'all.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's get out of this heat.
Oh my gosh, it's a million. Hydrate. Bring a water bottle to Vegas, please. Vegas weather is rough during the summer, even though it's technically the fall. But yeah, I'm not going to keep us here any longer. Thank you for hanging out with us. It's been lovely. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
See ya.